Thank you for joining me on the Southern Report once again. It's an absolute honor, privilege to have your company. I have parachuted in safely, and I know that my dear guest, which I'm really looking forward to bringing in, has parachuted safely. Parachutes are being packed away in the special room we have to do that. One of the wonderful things about doing this show, to some may say, I say it every time, is because you are then in an incredible position to bring on absolutely amazing guests. And the reason why that is so important is because education is everything. And I'm going to bring on the man that wrote this book in 2005, Kenneth Levin, and the Oslo Syndrome is the book here. He's written others, and he has quite an esteemed background, and we're going to learn about him. Kenneth, delighted that you are joining me, and to say thank you so much, sir.
I'm delighted to be here, Mark.
Brilliant. Kenneth, you are a psychiatrist. You have other background. Just wondered if you could spend a couple of minutes just describing your life experience, who you are. You've written a number of books. You've done a number of interviews on television, internet, etc. So just tell us about who you are.
Well, I am a psychiatrist. I was on the staff of Harvard Medical School Psychiatric Department for more than four decades, and in addition to that, I'm also a doctorate in history, and so very interested in history and in looking at situations, including the situation in Israel, situation of Jews now under siege in much of the world. I come at it both from a psychiatric and a historical perspective.
Brilliant. Kenneth, what was your experience at Harvard, especially when we look at the previous history and some of the alumni that have spoken there? A particular prize that has I've just gone out of my mind in regard to the anti-Semitism that is at Harvard. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's been terrible, and being in the medical school and also being primarily a clinician, I was not exposed directly to what was going on in the campus, or to some degree, but not to any great extent. But clearly, Harvard has major problems in its tolerance of not only anti-Zionism, but it's anti-Semitism. In my view, you can't distinguish between the two.
Yeah.
And but universities in general, academia in general, they have both the faculty and faculty-led students are inclined, this is historically a case, inclined to embrace whatever extremes are current. You know, they'll wear red or black or brown, whatever's in the fashion of the moment. So they'll go from, pro-communist to pro-fascist, whatever. And we're seeing it currently more of the latter. And Harvard had a history of indulging pro-Nazi sentiment on campus in the 30s. And in some sense, we're seeing a reprise of that in its current version.
When did you leave? When did you stop working in the faculty there, Kenneth?
About 5 years ago.
Right. So I think the hint is what you're saying, when you saw what has unfolded over the last 2.5 years ago, since the 7th of October, 2023, and the explosion and what happens on universities, you sadly weren't surprised?
No, there was enough already going on the campuses, even before October of 23. And again, there's a broader history to this sort of thing on campuses as well.
Right. And then we remember the infamous congressional interview of those three heads, don't we?
Right. Yes, we do.
Right. And the comments that were made, the fact that these people that are supposed to be in charge of these universities, in charge of these student bodies, then could not answer questions straight. They just could not answer.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It was unbelievable, but it was believable in the context of what had been going on there. And these people were appointed to their position, or at least some of them were, because they were tolerant of these kinds of outrages.
Or in one person's case, you're appointed to that position because you're very good at plagiarism.
Right, exactly.
This is, you know, what, just quickly before we move on from this, could you give me an outline of some of the things that you saw that were building up within that the university land in before the 7th of October? Sorry.
There was throughout the university, as many different schools attached to it, a medical school, law school, other faculties, and throughout there was a tolerance of pro-Palestinian demonstrations that often verged on violence and often directly attacked Jewish students verbally, occasionally physically, but and the university never addressed it. Never, and what you've seen at many other universities as well is the blackballing of speakers. You know, and always the mantra of, well, it's for their safety. Their safety because the universities are including Harvard, are allowing students and faculty to some degree to do outrageous things to keep people off the campuses, you know, to boycott them, to scream them down if they have an opportunity to speak, and then the university claims, well, for their protection, we don't want them on campus.
So does that mean that the universities, I don't say this with glee or I'm not being sarcastic, but I seem to feel that the universities feel that their land, their university is an American Constitution free zone. They don't believe in, I mean, free speech. Then where does that add up, Kenneth?
Well, you're right, and the hypocrisy of it, because they will say when students or even faculty are spouting the most vile anti-Semitic, statements, well, but that's free speech. But if you have a pro-Israel student attempting to speak and he or she is shut down, or a pro-Israel speaker is invited to the campus to speak, but then the invitation is canceled, that's not a free speech issue to these people.
It's only free speech as long as it's the speech that is acceptable to their ears.
Exactly. If you agree with me, you have free speech.
So these people that then leave these universities, they then go, well, some of them won't be, because some companies have turned around and said, because they've turned around and said, no, we're not employing you because of your anti-Semitism. And that has happened, as you know, over the last year and a half ago with certain protesters, etc. Yeah, the people, and then people who are from a Jewish background, they've turned around and said, well, we've been given X universities a lot of money over the years. We are now withdrawing that, and because of that, because you will not be addressing this issue, Kenneth, I know. I'm fascinated by this as well, because it's very important to see this through your eyes. As you've said, you've been working there for 40 years. Did anyone come up to you privately, don't tell names, other members of staff, other students, and just say, this is intolerable, but I just don't know what to do about it. I feel afraid to speak out about it.
Rarely, mainly because I was not on the main campus.
Yeah,
I was not directly immersed in it to a great extent, but it would come up with students, and a student who I had as patients, it would come up with.
So, I mean, what were the fees to attend Harvard? They're not cheap, are they?
No, I don't. The total cost is. I don't know the figures. If I figured this, I assume it's over $100,000 a year.
So people are paying good money for their children to attend, and then their children end up getting involved in activities that they shouldn't be involved with.
Yeah, and they're getting indoctrination instead of education, basically, on the campuses. And it's kind of a gulag, but you have to pay a lot of money to come
attend the
gulag. Right, exactly.
Right. So when you sorry, I know we want to move on to other things, but when you say the indoctrination, where is that? So you've got a department of, I don't know, this study, that study. Where is that indoctrination coming from? What do you feel specific departments who are actually doing this?
Well, certainly you have it, and I'll generalize beyond Harvard because, again, as you were well aware of, this is symptomatic of much of academia, and it's even more so elite academia, so-called elite academia. Much of it comes from mainly from the humanities, although it's spilled into the sciences to some degree as well. Middle East studies departments, and you mentioned the contributors, pro-Israel, Jewish contributors, other pro-Israel contributors, cutting back as a way to say we can't tolerate this bigotry, but and to some degree they're outbid by particularly by Qatar,
yes,
but other major Middle East players, and Qatar, the numbers of how much money is pouring in, has poured in, and continues to pour in from Qatar is staggering. I mean, some publications just a few years were talking about, well, over $5 billion in the last 15 years. Now they're talking about 7, 8, even $10 billion.
Wow.
And some of that goes to Middle East studies departments, essentially to fashion anti-Israel, anti-Jewish curriculum. And it's even worse than that because these departments are often vehicles for creating curriculum for K-12 schools as well. In addition, Qatar funds summer programs for teachers from K-12 schools, pushing the same message, the same bigoted messages. And in addition, there's Middle East money that supports students who pay full freight, no scholarship. They just and so universities are eager to have these students on campus, and that's another venue. And these students are often chosen for by their sponsors for their being prepared to be activists, so-called activists on campus, to be out and leading the anti-Israel chants and the anti-Jewish chants and activities and so forth.
Excuse me if this sounds like a naive question, because it's definitely over here. So when foreign students are coming into the American university system, their fees are more than if a local American was attending that university.
It's not quite the unit system where the fees itself are more, but many of American students, the universities wind up subsidizing either in scholarships or loans. And that's not the case for these. So when I say they pay full freight, they pay whatever the going cost is.
Absolutely. And of course, I mean, some of our universities over here are, they want the money because financially it's beneficial to them.
Exactly.
But even we've got that investment in private schools. Yes, it's gone into universities, etc. And even just another comment, even just to say that after the event on the day of the 7th of October, 2023, outside the Israeli embassy in London, there were then crowds protesting, screaming for restraint amongst other things. So this whole thing of how that is then coordinated.
Exactly.
Kenneth, you wrote a book on Freud, right? Who
Yes.
needs no introduction within the psychiatry world, and some of us would have all different opinions about that. I certainly have mine. But what was your motivation to writing that book, first of all?
Well, that book came out of part of my history studies, and I wanted I was interested in looking at the sources of his ideas. In many respects, if you take specific elements of his early theories, the originality is more in the way he wove them together than in specific elements of the theories. And so I was looking at 19th century neurology, non-medical psychology, 19th century medicine more broadly, to see sources of his ideas. And there's much to be seen there, and to put together where he came from, where his ideas came from, and then what he added to them, how he wove them together.
Right. And now, if we move on to this amazing book, which you wrote in 2005, and was this the second book that you wrote, or the third?
Oh, it was the third.
Right. And I'm now absolutely fascinated, because as a student of history, sir, and then with the student of psychiatry, were you that? And this is what I feel that you've done with this book, with bits that I've read. Full disclosure, this has just recently arrived, and I haven't had time to read all through of it, but I've dipped in, and there are things that are fascinating me. One, because of your address of, you're a historian, your address of the history, and getting into the mindset. And the reason why I wanted to have the talk with you, Kenneth, is because basically the Oslo Accords, they call it the West Bank, we call it Judea and Samaria. This whole thing is all back in a discussion, because politically, what is Israel going to do with that land? We've got area A, B, and C. And for some of us, this is complicated, and it may look complicated. And that's why I wanted to sit down with you and say, right, let's talk through this. Kenneth, again, what was your motivation for writing this amazing book?
Well, I thought that the whole Oslo process was disastrous for Israel. I thought that if you look at what their so-called peace partners, Arafat and those around him, were saying and doing, and they declared their intentions. They weren't hiding them. There was no way it made sense for Israel to kind of embrace him and those around him as peace partners, and they, for years, resisted doing so, and then bowed to doing so. And so, my question was, why? Why did they do this? This, in some ways, suicidal. Take up the suicidal undertaking. And I had written a paper in '97 that was translated into Hebrew and published in Israel, called Jews, Israelis, and the Psyche of the Abused. And a number of people said, oh, you should make a book out of this. And I said, well, it's a paper, but I was thinking about it, and my wife said to me, you have to do it. So then I did it. And that was I spent from about 5 years working on it, and it came out, as you said, in 2005.
Well, it certainly shows with the amount of effort that has gone into this. And it's not because people could say it's padded out. It is certainly not. But Kenneth, what was that paper then? What was the essence of that paper? You were getting into this, the psychology at that time, yes, that Israelis were going through.
That there are certain psychological responses within besieged communities, whether one's talking about minorities besieged by the surrounding majority, or small states under attack by larger neighbors, and especially where the siege is continuing, it's ongoing, it's chronic.
Yeah.
That, excuse me, elements of those populations almost invariably embrace the indictments of their haters, of their besiegers. And focus on trying to reform their own community to satisfy the indicters, the haters, even though historically there's not much experience of that really working. The haters are hating for reasons that transcend whatever the victim community does or doesn't do. But that's been a response. And I thought that Oslo fit neatly into that response. And even the title is Oslo, obviously the Oslo process or the Oslo Syndrome, but it's also a take on the Stockholm Syndrome.
Yeah.
And if people are not familiar with the Stockholm Syndrome, the Stockholm Syndrome refers to a bank robbery that went awry in the Swedish capital, and as a result of its going awry, the robbers were locked into a vault for a number of days, 5 or 7 days, I forget exactly which, but for quite a while, and with some hostages. And when the vault was finally open and they came out, the hostages demonstrated what was then considered inexplicable sympathy with their besiegers, with those who kidnapped them, basically. And so that and there's an old established psychoanalytic phenomenon that also addresses this. It was actually done by written up initially by Anna Freud, Freud's daughter, and I think either just before she came, it may have been a couple of years before she came to England, but it was in the 30s, called the identification with the aggressor. And that sort of captures the same phenomenon. And I thought that what you saw in Oslo was a reflection of this response within the Israeli community, the Jewish community, to the situation of chronic besiegement by the surrounding Arab world without any end to it in sight. And it's delusional because it doesn't really, to believe again that you can curry favor, you can reform and address and give some meaningfulness to indictments, to the attacks of the haters, and try to reform to satisfy them is a self-destructive approach to what you're facing. And in Israel's situation, some people, as I say this, might think, well, that's counterintuitive because Israel is a strong party. It's got a strong army. It's won its wars, however devastating they've been, and survived. But what all Israelis want, understandably, is they want peace. And no matter how strong Israel is, it cannot force peace. It cannot of itself control a dynamic that will lead to peace. The Arab world is by far the dominant party in the Middle East. The population exceeds the Jewish population of Israel by in excess of 50 times, yes. and land mass and so forth. And so if and when peace arrives, it will do so on the Arab timetable, not Israel's. And that's frustrating for Israelis because they're desperate for peace. They're eager for peace. And while they're strong enough, hopefully, to deter attacks, and if deterrence fails, to overcome attackers, none of its strength can translate into the peace they seek. And so, again, consistent with histories of minorities under siege, Jewish history in that circumstance, elements of the society delude themselves and say, no, we have agency to bring about peace, and this is what we'll do. And what they undertake is very destructive.
When you're reflecting on, and I do remember this, because we all remember it on our television screens, when there's Bill Clinton, with all his massive failings, and then we have that picture of Rabin and also Yasser Arafat on the lawn and shaking hands and his arms around them in regard to Oslo. And as you, if you research this, and you wonderfully in your book, of course, you're going through the aspects of the history of European Jewry. You make that comment about Poland and the minorities there and what rights, and all of what the point I'm making is all this background. And then you look at people like Rabin, who were born, I think, 1941, or his military background and everything. And then there's this other discussion about behind the doors, secret discussions to create a peace deal with Jordan. We all know the history where it wasn't my fault, I wasn't there, but Churchill gives 75% of the land away that was promised to the Jewish people, Sykes-Picot and all the rest. And again, Kenneth, I say respectfully, I'm not saying that to show off. What I'm saying is the urgency that many people need to actually really get their head around the history that you were talking about with the Oslo Accords and the back and all of the previous history. Recently, if you're going back to 1885-ish, all the pogroms in Kiev, then it's Herzl, then it's looking at the Dreyfus case, all of this. I just think all that psychology is building up. I'm saying that absolutely right to then why to reaching the Oslo Accords. Sorry,
right. You're right. No, and you bring up the handshake on the White House lawn between Rabin and Arafat, and was the opening of Oslo. That was the first step in Oslo. But that very night on Jordanian, Arafat broadcasting from Washington, he's still in D.C., on Jordanian television, tells his constituency, the Palestinian population, and the broader Arab world, that they should understand Oslo as the first stage in the plan of stages. Well, what's the plan of stages? In 1974, the PLO had put out a document talking about their approach to how they're going to destroy Israel. And they said in there that they would take whatever land they can get by negotiation and use that as a base for pursuing Israel's annihilation. So he said this again the night of the start of the quote peace unquote process, and repeated it at least a dozen times. And actually, it had done so before the ceremony on the White House lawn and in the weeks after. And yet, the Israeli media ignored it.
Wow.
And the Israeli government ignored it. Rabin, as you say, he was a war hero in Israel's War of Independence, and he had been elected in '92, a year before the start of Oslo, and he'd run on what was a standard labor party. He was labor, he was leftist center party, the major leftist center party in Israel. He had run on a standard platform that we want peace, but we have to await the emergence of a party on the other side that was prepared to give us peace. And they were still hoping to some degree for a deal with Jordan, which had been the case since '67, since Israel got control of the areas, and he went into this election with that as still the party's platform. We have to await a partner, But there were elements of his coalition that were screaming for dealing with Arafat. And in fact, there had been, it started several years earlier, at the end of 87 and 88, this Intifada, which was a sort of spontaneous, the people in the territories the Arabs in the territories had been in sort of a political nowheres in the land for those. There was no obvious way forward, and Israel's position, the Labor Party's position, and the Labor Party for the first 10 years after the 67 war was still the dominant party and around the country. Their position was, well, there are strategic areas in these territories that we have to hold on to, but there are also parts that we could return to Jordan. And Jordan's control of Judea and Samaria was never acknowledged by the world. They just conquered it in the 47-48 war. Yeah. But there are only two countries in the world that recognized their control over it. That was Britain and Pakistan. That was it. Mm-hmm. But Israel's position was they did not want to have to deal in an ongoing way with this alien Palestinian Arab population, and they would hold on to the major strategic areas like the Jordan Valley and the areas around Jerusalem, and for most part, like the Jordan Valley, there were hardly anybody living there, so that was easier. That was true in many of the strategic positions, and they would return the rest to Jordan. Jordan was never fully interested in it. It wasn't that they didn't want to acquire territory, but what came with the territory, first of all, was people who might not be that amenable to being ruled from Amman again. Mm-hmm. And in addition, they would be attacked by the rest of the Arab world for dealing with Israel. But this was the Jordanian plan. Jordan was, but it's sort of gotten less and less involved because they saw no gain to it, and they weren't about to make any kind of agreement. So before 90, there was a wall-to-wall government of sorts involving both Likud and Labor for a while before the 92 election, and in that coalition, Rabin, who was defense minister, put out a suggestion that rather than dealing, all these Palestinian leaders, so-called leaders outside of the area, were all terrorist leaders. He said, well, let's have an election, and the UN can supervise it, of the people in Judea and Samaria and Gaza, and they can elect new leaders, and we'll negotiate some kind of autonomy or whatever with them. And then he's elected. And again, he wanted that plan. He said to go around the terrorists. It's unclear if anybody in the territories would have risked their lives, that is, being killed by Arafat and his agents in the territories, if they agreed to this, who would have agreed to it. But in any case, once he was elected, the left wing of his own party and of his alliance, the Meretz Party, which is the alliance with Labor that won the election in 92, were demonstrating against Rabin for not talking to Arafat. And meanwhile, his foreign minister, Peres, was secretly talking to Arafat's representatives in Oslo. And when he learned of this, he just capitulated to it and went along with it. But it was it was a deal with the devil, because they were still saying their objective was to to destroy Israel. And how did they justify it? Oslo was a failure of all of Israel's elites, the political elite, the academic elite, as we talked about, academia and its frailties, the journalistic elite, they all
and the judicial elite.
And the judicial elite obviously is still an ongoing major problem for Israel, absolutely. And the Arafat came in, and no matter what Arafat would do in terms of still promoting violence and organizing, surreptitiously organizing violence, and the government of Israel would cover for it, basically, in these years. And so, for example, the Arafat arrived in the territories in Gaza in July of '94. And in the 22 months between July of '94 and to May of '96, in May of '96, the government fell for a few years, and that was Netanyahu's first turn as prime minister. In those 22 months, the rate of Israelis being killed by terror was 2.5 times the rate in the entire period from '67 to '93 when Oslo started. 2.5 times the rate. And the government barely commented on it. It commented on it to the degree to say that, it's the Islamist groups, it's Hamas and Islamic Jihad. They're doing this, not Arafat, even though their own intelligence was telling them that Arafat was collaborating with them. And Arafat, from the moment he came into Gaza, he took over broadcasting from what became Palestinian territories. He took over the schools. He took over the mosques, and in all of them, they were, militating for action against Israel, to kill Jews and destroy Israel. And again, and the collaboration of the other elites. We talk about the journalistic elites. It's a disgrace on Israeli journalism that, in effect, to report on what Arafat was actually saying in his speeches, or what was being taught in the schools, or what was being said in the mosque, there had to emerge non-official, sort of underground media to report on it. Like Palestinian Media Watch came out of this.
Yes.
You're familiar with Memory, Middle East.
Yes, very much so.
Well, yes, I'm sure also had reporting on this. There were several other groups reporting, but none of the main Israeli papers, or the English language or Hebrew papers, were essentially covering for Arafat. There was one episode where in '94, where Peres, the foreign minister, was being followed he agreed to, I think it was a Belgian report crew to do a story on Peres and Oslo. And they were down with Arafat. Peres was meeting Arafat in Gaza, and they were standing somewhere in within Gaza. And within hearing of the mic, Peres forgot that it was there. Peres said something like to Arafat, like, well, if the American Congress really knew what you're doing against peace, they would stop supporting this whole effort. This is the prime minister, the foreign minister of Israel saying this to Arafat. But still, he wasn't doing anything to stop, either the terror or the propaganda. And
wow. I mean, all of this background, this personal opinion, all of this background is so prescient to what we've seen, to me, since October the 7th, 2023, what's going on. If we look at, because I've seen them with my own eyes, whatever people think of Bibi Netanyahu, I've seen the protests outside his house, etc. And the fact that if we go back, I think the pilots of the IDF were threatening that they would go on the strike. Right. There were all these judicial protests in regard to the judicial reform. And And to put it in a context, within the UK, Kenneth, we've got lunatics within our judicial system and the abuse of power. And also, I'm fully aware of the lawfare and the judicial goings on within the United States as well. There is a theme here, isn't there, Kenneth?
Yes.
There is a theme.
Yes.
So, with what you're talking about, and then very sadly, Rabin was then executed. Or sorry, he was killed. Yep, taken out 1995. What I'm also really pleased to see in your book, fascinated by that, because it's also the learning, especially when you refer to communists and you refer to the amount of there were many Jews that were involved in communism. But there was a comment you make about, of those that did that, there was a disconnect between them and their family roots and their heritage roots. I think you make a distinction between that in your book, which I find.
Well, yes. There, and embracing the indictments of the haters.
Yep.
The Max Nordau, who was a Austrian Jewish writer at the end of the 19th, early 20th century, an early Zionist, a friend of Herzl's, and in some ways he was the leader in picking up Herzl's mantle after Herzl's premature death. But Max Nordau wrote around 1900 that the greatest success of the anti-Semites is they've gotten the Jews to see themselves through anti-Semitic eyes.
Yes.
Now, the issue, and shortly afterwards, there was a growth of books by Jews on Jewish self-hatred, Jewish anti-Semitism, and the Jewish self-hatred, in a sense, the paradigm of the example would be a Jewish child who goes into a school where there's a lot of hostility, is marginalized, is excluded socially, is verbally assaulted, perhaps physically assaulted. And if he doesn't get a strong enough counter message at home, either from his family or from his Jewish community, he will, or she will grow up saying, what's wrong with me? I'm carrying this taint. How do I overcome it? And there's no way I could overcome it. And enter adulthood with the same distorted self-denigrating vision. And but Nordau could also have said that as much as there's this self-hatred in a sense, as much as Jews were seeing themselves through anti-Semitic eyes, to a large extent, they were also even more seeing other Jews through anti-Semitic eyes. So there are people who would say, oh, I don't fit the stereotype of the anti-Semites put out, but there are others who do. And in some instances, not uncommonly, it was others being a communal thing. My part of the Jewish community doesn't fit the stereotype, but that other part does. And it is often people across political or social or economic divides. So you had German Jews seeing Eastern European Jews as the real butts of anti-Semitism, and socialist Jews seeing the Jewish bourgeoisie, Jewish middle class as the real butts, and secular Jews seeing religious Jews. Now, in Russia, in Imperial Russia, Imperial Russia inherited the largest section of the world Jewish population in the context of divisions of Poland in the 18th century. There was a large Polish-Lithuanian joint state, and it suffered major setbacks beginning in the 17th century, and then a number of divisions between powers, surrounding powers in the 18th century. And by the 18th century, Poland was gone, and it was either part of Austria, or part of Prussia, or part of Russia, and Russia got the largest part. And in Russia, what had been Jewish leadership under Poland had no sway with them, and some alternative leaderships evolved within the community, but they too had no sway with the Russian government. The Russian government was just hostile. The Tsarist government was just hostile to them, and in the face of that anti-Semitism, there were Jews who said, it's not really all of us because we are too religious and too much in the middle class. And the answer was socialism to fight the government. The only real tool, perhaps, to fight the government, and secularism, and that would release us from anti-Semitism. And most of the unlike Herzl thought, when in his idea of the Jewish state, that would be for everybody, the religious, the secular, middle class, or whatever, and for Western Jews, Eastern European Jews, North African, Middle Eastern Jews, would be for everybody. The Russian Zionists, who ultimately dominated the issue of the Jewish community under the Mandate, and then for the initial decades of the state, the first 3 decades of the state, were Russian socialist Zionists. Now, because of the Polish experience, and Poland and much of Eastern Europe remained more of it was much later than Western or Central Europe to end feudalism, to end exit the Middle Ages in a sense, and going from feudalism to early exits and the growth of cities, and then into modernity. And in that earlier system, Jews retained more of a sense of nationhood as well. So even though you had in the West, if Jews became socialists, and certainly if they became communists, but even as socialists, they did so in the context of leaving their Jewish identity entirely. In the East, you could be retain a sense of Jewish nationalism and also be a socialist. And so you had these socialist nationalist parties and the socialist Zionist parties emerging in Russia, and they became the dominant political force in early history of Israel. Now, if you say, why did this embrace of the haters of Arafat and all come particularly in '93, and what about all the years before in Israel's history? What was different? Well, part of the answer was that people were still hopeful in earlier years that peace would emerge. They didn't have to go to delusional extremes to conceive of peace, because they had other ideas of how it emerged in real terms. So, for example, there have been all the attacks on the Jews, led by the Mufti of Jerusalem, the one who had been Hitler's partner, who had been broadcasting from Berlin during the war that Arabs should kill any Jews near them.
And then we've got the Hebron massacre of 1929.
Exactly, and all those slaughters. But they thought, well, once we became a state, we established a state, they'd have to be reconciled, so the siege would end. But it didn't end, obviously. Then they thought, well, once the imperial powers, the colonial powers, were gone from the Middle East, because in some ways they encouraged the hatred. They fostered it in some respects. Then peace was. Well, you left and it still didn't have peace. Then they thought you had in '52, you had the revolution in Egypt, and the Egyptians are talking, the military takes over, and they're talking about, well, we're going to look at our internal problems and turn to socialism and so forth. And Israelis were, okay, there'll be another socialist state, and they're going to look at their internal problems. And then Nasser emerges from that. So they had all these disappointments. Then with '67, they won the war, but they thought, okay, the Arabs are going to want their land back, so we'll have peace then in the context of returning these parts of their land. And then instead you had a Khartoum meeting a few months after the war, where the Arab League says no negotiations, no recognition, no peace. So that was blasted. And so all these, one factor that led to Oslo was all these hopes for peace were dashed. Another factor is, as bad as things were, and there are people saying we have to talk to our enemies. There were people saying that before the creation of the state. There are people saying that in the first 3 decades. We have to talk to these people, these terrorists, because we have to make a deal with them somehow. Part of the reason why that never got that much traction earlier was because the left was leading the country, and more people, and many more people on the left, identified with the leadership, with the Labor Party, what became the Labor Party, then identified with those who are calling for talking with the terrorists. But something dramatic happened in 1977. A non-labor, non-leftist government, a Likud government under Begin, took control. And for the next 15 years, between 77 and to the election in 92, the Likud either was the government or was the leading or equal partner in a government of national unity. And in this context, when the left saw what they viewed as a hostile government, they wove this other fantasy of what perpetuated the conflict. And they said, well, if the new Jew, they saw themselves as the new Jew, again, the new Jews, that is, they were largely secular, right, and largely socialist. If we were really dominant again, then we can make a deal. But it's the old Jew, that is the Likud, they saw as representing the more religious and the more middle class. And the Likud is actually part of the Likud grouping that formed the Likud party was the old liberal party that was liberal in a standard Western sense of liberal. It was middle class, liberal economic, pro-liberal economics. And that was part of Likud. So these middle class and religious people are keeping us from having peace because they're the ones who destroy us. And it was largely also the Sephardim, the Jews from Muslim countries. They distrust the Arabs. They're too distrustful, and so we have to take the government again, take it over, and make these concessions. And it was this psychology that sort of propelled this circumstance, that propelled this delusional psychology forward, and was a major factor in leading to Oslo. And it created, there was an alternative history, it was called the New History, that tried to rewrite the whole past to make Israel seem somehow remiss in there not having been peace earlier. And the whole purpose of the history was to soften the population up to accept something like Oslo. And it was a betrayal of the country, really. But new historians were very popular. They're still popular in much of the world, even in Jewish communities, and they're teaching everywhere. And they're still in Israel too.
When they're talking about old Jews and the Jews that have come out of other Middle Eastern countries around, and actually they're being expelled after the the state of Israel was then declared. But that's an important thing because, and I'm sorry, we've just got a few more minutes to go, Kenneth. I think we're going to have to do this again because this is absolutely fascinating, and I'm very grateful to you for that, because that's when the whole Nakba comes up, doesn't it? And the fact that they're not going to talk about the fact that Israel absorbed about 850,000 Jews that have been expelled from Arab countries. But you've said so many powerful things. The thing that you've just said is revising history, revisionist history.
Absolutely.
And look how relevant that is. And within a communist situation, within a socialist situation, that's the number one thing they want to do. They just want to revise history. It's all gone. Now everything's going to be fine because our utopian dream is to march to. So, and maybe it's a discussion for another day, but when you say historians, people like Ilan Pappé come to mind.
Absolutely. He didn't even pretend. there are other new historians, so-called new historians, who claim that they're doing objective history. He doesn't even claim that. He says, well, all history is biased by the historians' political views, and so
Right.
mine, he doesn't even claim to be objective.
Well, he's I think he's over here at Exeter
Yeah,
University.
he has been in England for,
He has been, yes. Yeah, my eyes roll to the ceiling. But this is really powerful because then we look at the Jews that came out of Russia, I think, around about 1984, I think, and then we look at incredible people like Saransky's experience and others, where they're reflecting on all of that history. And of course, we go back, as you said, you mentioned gulags, Alexander Solzhenitsyn. It's all of this is to be brought into all this mix in the mindset. So amazing. Kenneth, do you mind if we do this again at some point?
I'd love to do it again.
I would love to. We could do part 2 and carry on with that, because there is so much to talk about. Kenneth, where can I know I got hold of your book? Where can people find you? Where can they find your work, find your books?
Oh, well, you can get Amazon. You can get. I also have a new book that talks similarly about current situation of Jews in America in the face of the rising anti-Semitism.
Wow. Well, is that out now? I do apologize.
That's out. I can hold it up if I can.
Go.
It's called The Canary on the Couch.
Wow.
The psychology of Jewish self-delusions in the face of rising anti-Semitism.
When did that come out?
That came out in October, late October. And,
what an amazing title. I'll tell you why that's an amazing title. Give a shout out to a dear friend of mine in New York who just had the amazing Trevor Loudon come and speak. And he brought him up to New York. Sadly, not enough people attended the event because of, I just think, lethargy, because I think they're sitting on their couch, Kenneth, and they're not out and seeing what's going on. And especially they need to see what's going on, especially when people like Mandani are now running New York and are not clearing the snow quick enough. Yeah. I would love to talk to you about this new book, because what is the red-green axis? Dear Trevor has been warning about this for years, and others.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're seeing that on the streets here. We're seeing that in our political discourse, and also in America, which you're fighting this sort of, people call it the woke right. And the I think Jew hatred, bluntly, let's call it what it is, that is really rising within certain aspects of America. So yeah, Kenneth, I just want to say it's been a delightful conversation and so stimulating, and I love it when we are talking about history which needs to be applied today. Is that a fair comment?
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
You're absolutely on the mark. Yes.
Thank you. Kenneth, stay where you are. I'll say goodbye to you on the other side, and I'll play us out. Okay. And I'll see you on the other side. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.